today, the most recent article I've written is about this book. Isn't it kind of pretty? Anyways, Going Infinite by Michael Lewis, same gentleman that wrote Moneyball and a few other actually quite a few other great books. Ever started a book somebody recommended and thought, well, this will be interesting, and about, I don't know, the first chapter in, you go, wow, okay, this was not what I was expecting, and I definitely did not think it would relate in some way to being a neurodiverse coach. You probably haven't had that last part, but that moment where you're like, wow, I did not think from the title, and this was about a Bitcoin enterprise MIT mathematician, that I would at all wind up thinking about so many other things while I was reading this book. But that's exactly what happened while I was reading this book. And really, it starts out in the first chapter. The author's describing the young man in this story, Sam Bankman-Fried. I'm not the best about that. SBF is what a lot of people, how it's described on the internet. And he's explaining how he's on a Zoom call, truly being interviewed by somebody, and his foot is just bouncing and he's playing a video game, and he doesn't really pause the video game until he absolutely has to actually engage with this person. Then he answers like 1 or 2 words, and then he goes back to this video game. And that's right in the first chapter, a little way he's describing him. And I just love the part where everybody that I've talked to that's read the book was like, wow, I was just really surprised. Like, he's not even paying attention. And I thought, I instantly knew at that point he was definitely had traits that would be considered neurodiverse. His leg is bouncing. He's distracting himself to even pay attention to this conversation on Zoom. I just had to chuckle. The book is packed with a very riveting story of a young man coming of age in a time and exploring new frontiers, in particular the Bitcoin market, and becoming a really dominant part of that. He starts a company called FTX. He unfortunately makes choices that are considered illegal and loses a bunch of money, and is now, not to be a spoiler alert, but you can Google this at any point, he has now been sentenced to at least 25 years in prison. And this was just in the past few years. This book is actually very new, and it's well worth a read. I will tell you that. It is very interesting. If you've wanted to understand more or less about Bitcoin, you will gain some knowledge. So there's more than less about the Bitcoin world and how cryptocurrency kind of came about and has been coming of age. I would still tell you it is in its earlier phases of where that currency is going, potentially. It's really hard to say overall. The book, though, is a very interesting look at those years, Sam's early years a little bit, and then the years of the company FTX being built and the research agency that went along with it. And as a neurodiverse person myself, I did find the story interesting, particularly as things start to fall apart. One of the things I highlight in my article is I really talk about how obvious it is that there's a major breakdown in communication, which is not shocking. That can be a very common thing when you are processing so much information so quickly. Like when Sam gets his first job out of MIT, it's for a company called Jane Street. It's an investment organization, and they give him all of these really intense tests where he has to decide what decision should he make, and the goal is to see how quickly he can come to that answer. He comes to that answer within seconds to minutes each time. He's one of the fastest people to come to those decisions so quickly. And that says a lot about all the things that his brain was able to think about, manage, process to come to those resolutions. Doesn't mean that they were all right or accurate, but obviously working for that organization, for Jane Street, where he started, he wasn't making bad decisions because they were making billions, and he was a part of that process. So he definitely is a very brilliant person, and is able to process large amounts of data very quickly, looking for the best solution out of that. That is not an uncommon thing for the very brilliant and gifted in the neurodiverse community, to be able to process vast amounts of information. That said, there isn't exactly even a language to help that person communicate all the things that they have brought into mind to process and come up with this solution. And often I've found people really struggle with communication. And that was one thing I really thought of while I was reading the book, was that breakdown in communication. Another thing that came out of the book was a little additional research I did afterwards to see how things turned out, how long he was sentenced, those types of things. And there were a lot of comments, because at that point, actually, once he was arrested and started to go through the prosecution portion of it, the legal side of it, he was tested, and it did turn out they believe he has autism. He was actually diagnosed with that, and it was part of the court hearings. The comments people had about that online were really interesting, and it was very telling and a good reminder that not everybody is open to neurodiversity or understands it, or people that are neurodiverse and how they're thinking. Obviously, if we're a small segment of society, the rest of society is thinking slightly different than us and would look at us at times and go, I just don't understand. And if enough people come together and say, I just don't understand, it can lead to some pretty major consequences. And I believe that's part of the breakdown that happened for Sam. The fact that he embezzled, or was a missing $800 million, that's also part of the problem going on for Sam. So I will not underscore that. Broke laws is paying the price. And that is a major part of the story, is how exactly that evolved and came about. So if you're thinking about reading the book and you're neurodiverse, I actually encourage you to listen to the audio and enjoy the book. I would be really curious how you feel about it, what you connect with on it or what you don't. And as you see comments online, or maybe look into it a little further, what you might also pull out of those areas in your research. So don't be afraid to enjoy a good book in the coming months and the coming year. I'm Joy Gina, international neurodiversity coach, always curious about what's going on in the world and always, always wishing for the greatest success for people. Bye now.